Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Bastille called Doom Days. Well, alright. Third time's the charm, right? And look, I would have every good excuse to skip over this new album from Bastille. I was lukewarm on 2013's Bad Blood, a project that was buoyed on a few genuinely great songs and a lot of underwhelming mediocrity, and I got even less to work with on 2016's Wild World, saved only by the deep-cut blame amidst a torrent of awful production choices and writing that seemed to miss treating its acrid condescension and surface-level poetry for some genuine earnest swell. And in spoilers, it didn't work. Then last year there was Happier, which stripped away all the traces of organic swell and groove to work with Marshmallow, and it's basically a song that exists. Nobody will remember or care about that song in a year or two. It was Dan Smith cashing in his limited connections for a momentary crossover so that Bastille is no longer technically a one-hit wonder. But hey, maybe this third album would work. Maybe framed as a concept album starting at midnight and then working to the morning during an extended party with some explicit lyrical timestamps. This is an arc that has worked before. Hell, one of my favorite albums from 2017, Written at Night by the underground rapper Uncommon NASA, it took a similar window of time with more introversion and introspection, so I was morbidly curious how Bastille of all bands would produce this, especially as they didn't seem like the band that would make a party album in this lane. But alright, what the hell? What do we get out of Doom Days? Well, I can say this. The concept, it's at least kind of compelling on some level, gives Bastille a lyrical focus I can respect. Shame that the rest of the album is sloppily produced, once again failing to play to Bastille's strengths, and is generally kind of mediocre. Small step up from Wild World, sure, but it doesn't redeem a project that's trying to subvert your average party, and then misses at some point it actually needs to go over the top to give the satire much weight or punch. Or, actually say something. It's kind of ambiguous whether this is satire at all. No, what the album reminds me a lot more of is going on an extended bender with your rich, cultured friend who has always had a lot more money than good sense, and then proceeds to try to make the entire night a whirlwind, the best night ever, when you're stuck as the designated driver. Combined with the lingering desire to make an album that captures the vibes of Frank Ocean's Blonde or Jamie XX's In Color, but has none of the attention to detail or texture that allowed those albums to work. In other words, yeah, I hate to say it, but I've been to this party before, Bastille, and with this album, you aren't really pulling it off all that well. I'm not sure I want to stick around. And I want to start off with the content, because to Bastille's credit, this is probably their most direct and streamlined that their writing has ever been. It might be wordy and nowhere close to as deep as it thinks it is, but when you're trying to coast on a haphazard, scattered party vibe, I'm inclined to be forgiving here, given that the band does commit to a mostly realistic structure for that party, emotionally at least. It starts off loud and ruckus before kind of souring. You get the strikeout moment of trying to hook up that then prompts a brief downward spiral before the whole cycle of collapse and boot and rally hits again. A hookup is kind of managed, and then you snatch a couple hours of sleep before the morning. I don't just believe this party exists, I'm fairly certain I've been to this party at some point. But therein lies my first issue. You're tracing the arc. What are you doing with it? What are you trying to say about it? The band has admitted that songs like 4 AM are trying to imitate similar vibes from Frank Ocean's Blonde, but that album was so much more organic, introspective, and detailed than the late night endeavors. They was trying to say something. And hell, you know what, Jamie XX, they had less words altogether on In Color, but the production was so much more meticulous in cultivating the festival vibe that it didn't need a lot of words. It didn't need a lot of detail, but Bastille doesn't even have that. But then you get songs like the title track here, which are trying to reckon with phone addiction and porn addiction, and how the world is ending all around them. They're just hiding within some glamour that's cracking around the edges. If you've heard any satirize the party project, none of those should be remotely surprising, which is why it's such a disappointment that Bastille then embraces all that shallowness without much in the way of introspection at all. This is an album that opens up making bad decisions. There's a song called Bad Decisions, and it seems to hit a bottom out moment, prepping you for some sort of deeper reckoning, some sort of internal truth getting revealed, but it never happens. We don't dig deeper into Dan Smith's thinking, if he even is thinking, and that might be part of the point that he's somewhat incoherent and trying to string together the next hookup on another place, and thus the only reason why the moment of genuine triumph kind of works at all on Joy is because aesthetically it does capture the rush of getting that text that you never expected from the person the night before. I gotta give him credit, the emotion is captured right there, but really, that only works in isolation, and it doesn't really feel all that earned given the arc of the album ahead of of it. You would think that it would bottom out or just crash out before going up to do it again. To get the happy ending, it's kind of cheapening the whole album. Now, you might be thinking, Mark, so what if the depth isn't there? You're right that Bastille uses language implying greater depth than there often is. You've known that for years, so maybe they're just trying to capture the party arc in the most straightforward way possible. No subversion, just adjust your expectations. So, okay, putting aside we're dropping the bar considerably for Bastille, I am willing to consider this, except for one major problem. The band's chasing a vibe they really can't pull off, and a huge part of it is Dan Smith, and this is what I mean about not playing to the group's strengths. Smith is the sort of singer who can sell broad, sincere emotions, which is why the love-struck ending of Joy clicks as a closer when it honestly shouldn't, and why Quarter Past Midnight as the party opener does hit with some impact, especially when you pile on all the multi-tracking for the big hook. Hell, for as intentionally clumsy as Another Place was intended to be, it at least seems to come from a more sincere place, and that you could make the argument that going in for the broad strokes, Dan Smith's sincerity would be an asset as the everyman that's tumbling in over his head. But not only can he not hit that note, his very British patrician air he has to his yearning, his very limited vocal range, more limited emotional range, and his choice of multi-tracking has always been a sticking point across his entire career to getting to be that everyman. But there's also none of the wildness or instability or even a sense of panic to accentuate the drama on display, which only further distances the audience from getting sucked along for the ride. And that's before you get the writing that seems to actively undercut the straightforward party. And that's before you get the blatant attempts as a Post Malone impression, of which the less said, the better. And you know, that made me wonder whether Bastille is really best suited to make this sort of party album at all, given their style in comparison with bands that can ramp the drama up to 11 with a similar arc. Think Glitterbug by the Wombats from back from 2015. Or you know what, think an act that's willing to pace themselves to lean into the vibe like Frank Ocean did on Blonde. But then you realize not only is Dan Smith an awkward fit for this sort of tone, given that he seems like the type of person who'd want to control all that vibe with no looseness rather than just ride it, but it also translates to a lot of the production as well. Because once again, Bastille produced this entire project in-house, and once again, they sound like a band that's approaching tones with a ham-fisted approach to fidelity and blending, especially in the percussion, which is something you should want to prioritize sounding good if you're gonna bury the melodies all over again. Which they did. Let's get the outright bad decisions out of the way first with cuts like The Waves, which is trying for washed out cod reggae with all sorts of muddy filters, and it sounds like an attempt to blend a bad Post Malone impression with a Magic song, and a lot of really badly blended vocal filters burying any sort of that keyboard melody. But I'm not going to excuse the wonky tuning of the guitar and the woozy delivery on 4 AM, which still centers the vocals and blended sample at the expense of any real atmosphere or greater tune. That's where you get the compressed percussion and the horns that don't really match with anything. And this also becomes an issue whenever you get drops on this album, like on Million Pieces or Nocturnal Creatures, or even the attempt at more of a crescendo on Quarter Past Midnight, where instead of actually showing a gradual buildup in the percussion or the melody, God forsake, I wish it was the melody, the percussion placement is so blocky, reliant on breakbeats, and still feeling so inorganic that it neuters any of the tension, which doesn't help when the vocals are trying to sell the weight of something bigger and you just get a lot of programmed hand claps. And that would assume the fidelity of the drums would match the clarity you would get off of any sort of tune or the vocal line. Big assumption, given that Bastille still seems to be trying to approach a Kanye West-esque power clash, and he continues to strike out with it because Kanye knows how to blend these properly. And all this dances around the obvious point that even in the songs here I kind of like, none of the tones are all that unique or distinctive. Hell, give the overmixed trap backdrop of Another Place, the faux gospel soul of Joy than most other mainstream producers, you'd probably get something that would sound better. They probably would have gotten rid of the squeaky failure melody behind Joy, or would have picked up some crisper percussion to match the sloppy vocal layering on the title track, or gotten rid of all the compression around Million Pieces that adds to nothing if you're going for that broader, sweeping EDM-inspired song. But that raises an interesting question. Bastille are just coming off of some real success with Happier with Marshmello. So why on earth was this all produced in-house when they were able to find some collaborative success? Especially when outside of scattered UK singles, they've not really found any more mainstream crossover. Well, if I were to hazard a guess, it circles back to their label, Virgin EMI, who probably have realized that Bastille is the rare silent majority act, generally ignored by critics but still winds up getting airplay and mainstream acceptance, but that they actually have a cult following who will buy whatever the hell they put out, especially in the UK. So you know what? I can see them saying, go for the one and done collaboration, which fascinatingly was not tacked onto this album to try to juice the streaming numbers, even though you could make an argument that Happier kind of could work on the album. And then, yet, you get it to keep the brand, you get the name out there, let Dan Smith put his guest vocals on other pop cuts like he did with Craig David on I Know You, but the band, they're doing their own thing, on the cheap, for their own releases instead of shelling out for the big name producers. Because you know what? The fans are going to buy it anyway! The only problem is that this has put a hard ceiling on Bastille going forward. Because while the production remains messy retreads of better sounds in the mainstream right now, and Dan Smith remains a promising but limited and poorly utilized singer, the only improvement I've seen has come in some of the focus of the writing. And without greater introspection, it's only going to take them so far. In other words, while it is a slightly better album than Wild World, it is still mediocre, and until they're actually challenged or pulled out of their own ecosystem, I'm not sure they're much worth me saying much on Bastille anymore. Solid 5 out of 10. Really just for the fans who won't care what I'll say. And everyone else, look, nothing here is as good as Pompeii or the best singles from Bad Blood. You can keep moving on. You're not going to miss much. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I'm honestly a little bit surprised I had this much to say about this band, given that I'm still kind of mediocre on it. But hey, if you want to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. And if you actually want to tell me how wrong I am, polls up there. Hey, you want to buy or stream the album, links are in the description down there as well. Also linked to all my social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you know the deal. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And hey, if you guys want to potentially get and see where Billboard Breakdown is, which some of you continue to ask about it, it's on the new channel, links in the card right over here. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.